as my most recent Audible purchase, I've spent the afternoon perusing what's a relatively short book and agree with some elements and disagree with a number of them. I also want to preface and say that words and linguistic models of reality are not reality. They create our reality, and they're not real, meaning words are always symbols for reality. And so if anyone gets value from this book, take the value and work with it. Never discount value, sustainable well-being that comes about just because somebody else criticizes the way you obtain it. So this is more of an analysis of some of the thought architecture or codes of this book. So we start out with a pretty big claim.
What you will discover in this book and how to get the most out of reading it. This book was written to help you find everything you've been searching for and the answers to all the questions you've had your entire life. I understand this is a very bold statement, but you will see shortly why I have complete confidence in saying this. What I know.
So this obviously quite impressive. And, I enjoyed the confidence and, the grandiosity of a 2-hour book suggesting that it would, be the answer to everything. As I've listened through and kind of done some of the exercises, I have not found that to be the case, but
be the truth from the depths of my soul is that you will not be the same person as you were after you've read this book.
Well, that's true with everything, meaning you're not the same person after listening to me say you're not the same person, right? Every moment changes us. We are slightly different. So, and every aspect of our environment is part of that change. So just, you can turn on a TV program and 5 minutes later, you will be a very, very slightly different different person. And the difference will be influenced by the program. So that's not a hard claim to make. In fact, it would be pretty impossible to find any element of your environment that did not impact you to a very minor degree. But of course, what we're interested in is not will you be different, but what we're really interested in is, are we becoming the person that we want to be as a result of engaging with, in this case, a thought exercise? I'll pause a moment because every book is a thought exercise, right? All thoughts are composed of words. All words generate thought. Right? If I say all words generate thought, and you comprehend what that means, you will think about that, right? And so one of the ironies with, this particular ilk of books is they are nothing but thought generation, and yet they're relatively critical of thinking. We'll skip through the introduction. Let's see what we have.
Chapter 1. The Journey to Finding the Root Cause of Suffering. People have a hard time letting go of their suffering. Out of a fear of the unknown, they prefer.
Now that's something I highly agree with. I think that the fear of the unknown is stronger than our fear of known suffering. And so I would say that a large percentage of people, a large percentage of the time, myself included, prefer dealing with some form of chronic misery to venturing wildly into the unknown. Now, in my case, I I've tested this a number of times and kind of reaffirmed, I would say, my fear of the unknown. And what I mean by that is, I have the luxury of travel, of doing a lot of experiments. And so I have done a tremendous amount of experimentation in search of sustainable well-being, what we all want. It's another point that I agree with the author about. But I find that 90% of the time I create surprises for myself. The quality of my experience drops significantly relative to planning. Right? If I pick a random country or ask someone to pick a random country for me and go travel there, there is a very high likelihood that I will not enjoy it as much as going to what I've come to learn are my favorite countries, having done some experimentation. If I go to a random surprise hotel, I will not enjoy it as much as a hotel that I've vetted and, visited 10 hotels and then picked the one I liked and then picked the room I liked, etc. So in my case, 90% of the time when I relinquish control, whether it's in my company and see what my employees do, or in romance and see what surprise gift, my partner comes up with, 90% of the time, it's a steep decline from what I would call a known strategy. And so, as much as I love the idea of being able to, surrender to life and, let it just happen, when it's so much more unpleasant, so much more uncomfortable, it's a bother to organize and control things, but I find it's worth it.
Suffering that is familiar. Thich Nhat Hanh. There is an important distinction to make when we're speaking about suffering. When I mention suffering in this book, I'm referring to psychological and emotional suffering. There is a way in which no matter what happens in your life, you do not have to suffer emotionally or psychologically.
Now, I would question that. I would say that as you develop mastery, so what he's differentiating between is pain and suffering, right? That pain is going to that pain is going to happen, but suffering does not have to happen. So pain, someone twists your thumb off, a train drives into you, that's pain. And what he's saying is, there will be pain, that's unavoidable. But suffering is the thoughts you think about the pain. And so that's kind of the gist of what he's pointing out. And I do think that there's an enormous truth to that. But it can backfire. And what I mean is, Byron Katie her whole work is about this distinction between reality and the story that we believe about reality, that all suffering is the thoughts that we believe. And that's very true. However, if your daughter is raped in front of you and you attempt to change the story about that, like you think this is a horrible thing, her life is, being violated, maybe she's catching an STD, you feel I'm a bad parent for not being able to stop this. So there's all this suffering created by these thoughts that we believe, right? I've got to do something. I don't know what to do. I feel incompetent. What can I do? If I shout out at them, will they hurt her more, right? Because someone who's trying to gain a sense of power, if we defy them, right, in the psychological dynamic. If you defy a gang leader who's trying to assert dominance, they increase the torment. They're looking to break you down to the point of submission. That's their agenda. And so if you're trying to show that you don't care, they may kill you, kill your daughter, etc., but bring you down to a point of submission. So in that context, you're trying to rapidly think, what's going to have the best impact? How do I protect my family? And, yes, Byron Katie and, the author are correct that these are sources of suffering. Believing I'm a bad parent, I didn't, I walked down a shabby alley, I didn't teach my child self-defense. I didn't learn self-defense. I mean, okay, so these are all thoughts that are going to produce suffering. However, if you attempt and say basically, no, rapes and all that, they're inevitable, but I don't have to feel bad about this, right? I don't have to believe the story that my daughter's life is going to be ruined. I don't have to believe that these are, vicious people that are trying to hurt someone. And, who knows? It is true that if you can pull that off, your suffering will go down. But if you can't pull it off, and I haven't found anything within the book that I would give any kind of credence to anyone being able to master that. Telling yourself that your thoughts are the problem, right? Or telling your daughter who's developing PTSD that if she just, lets go of the story is not very helpful. Statistically speaking, and you can develop actually a sense of what I would call metaphysical shame, where you're just as reactive as you always have been to cult programming, but you now hold yourself responsible for the cult programming, and you get into a knot of shame around that. So that's something to be aware of.
I'm not saying that what we go through is all in our heads or made up. Terrible and unfortunate events happen to people every single day. What I'm saying is that although we experience a lot of pain in our lives, suffering is optional. In other words, pain is unavoidable, but how we react to the events and circumstances that happen in our lives is up to us, and that will dictate whether we suffer or not.
And that also, the pain is unavoidable. That is on a continuum, right? If we walk in front of a bus, pain is unavoidable. But what if we learn to not walk in front of a bus? That pain is avoidable. What if we learn to eat a better diet? Then many pains are avoidable. What if we learn to go jogging and stay fit? And again, various pains are avoidable. What if we cut down on sugar? And so is there a point, right? It seems like a tremendous amount of the pain is avoidable, right? And I think that's partly where the challenge comes in, that we can look at a cause and effect relationship that if other people did something or did something differently, that pain would not have happened. Or if we had done something differently, that pain had not happened. And I think one of the questions is how much of that pain and or guilt leads to transformative action, right? In other words, let's say that, your friend walks in front of a car every week and every month they get hit and they just say, well, that's part of life and keep walking out in the road. is that and they feel great about it, right? And then they don't beat themselves up about, that because, well, that's suffering is one of the noble truths and it's going to happen. And they don't make up a story that they're dumb or foolish, so they don't create suffering, but they just keep ending up in the hospital. Is that a superior outcome to saying, no, the pain is avoidable. I need to stop walking out to the street without looking to the right and left. It's my job to do that. And I feel bad because I didn't look right and left. I know that's the way to avoid that pain. I didn't do it. What's wrong with me, right? So that's a suffering thought. What's wrong with me? I didn't look right and left, but that's why I'm in pain. And so I don't know the answer to that because I have seen blissful idiots who cause an enormous amount of clearly avoidable drama and pain in their life. But they're very positive about it, right? They built their house without an engineer. It fell down, but they're grateful to God that they all got out safe, right? And I'm thinking, are you going to use an engineer next time? No, they're going to pray again. God got them out of the house the first time, and, they're going to go forward with that. So I'm not sure how much, I think it's a reality. I don't know any human beings who don't experience pain. But I'm not sure if human ingenuity is capable of eliminating all of that. Obviously not at our level of intelligence, but is that a good aspiration to mitigate pain? I have a close friend who constantly creates the same problems and doesn't like thinking about it. And so she constantly creates the same problems. So she doesn't suffer about the pain that she causes. She quickly forgets about it, and then she causes more pain again. These are complexities that don't fit into the simplicity of a 2-hour book, but they're the complexities that we deal with as human beings.
Buddhists say that anytime we experience a negative event in our lives, 2 arrows fly our way. Being physically struck by an arrow is painful. Being struck by a second emotional arrow is even more painful. Suffering.
So is the second arrow, the psychological, physical, arrow, is that more painful than the first, right? So if you get hit by a bus and you're paralyzed and break break your leg in 3 places and have a concussion, that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 pain. Is the thought, maybe I could have done something better? What could I do differently? What could I teach my children about how to avoid being hit in that situation? Is that more painful than the physical injury? Rarely. So I think that can go both ways. Meaning I think sometimes it is the other way. I mean, I would actually say that psychological or social events hit us, and then what we say about them can be more painful. Like someone looks at us and says, gosh, that's a pretty out-of-date outfit. Oh, well, that doesn't cause any pain. But the thought that we think about that, am I a loser? That could be like a 7 out of 10 pain. So in that case, I would say that the second arrow is stronger. In the case of a bus hitting and me saying, is there anything I could have done better? That's not that painful, right? That's a story, that's a question, but it's not half as painful as the original arrow.
The Buddha explained, in life, we can't always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first.
And that, I think, is true, meaning we cannot always control the first arrow, or even if we can, we don't. Meaning we lack the intelligence to avoid a large amount of preventable pain, which we're just not tracking and preventing it. There's all kinds of pain that could be diminished 90% on our planet. We're just not working to do it. And I think that it's important to be aware of that and to continue to iterate towards reducing chronic levels of pain. Like we've done a lot of that with childbirth. I mean, you would think it'd be a pretty big deal to lose a child. And over the last few hundred years, we've decreased infant mortality at birth significantly, right? So we've reduced that pain. But there's still massive amounts of other pain.
The second arrow is optional. When I first heard this quote from Buddha a few years ago,
the second arrow is optional. I actually am not sure about that, because there's a reaction to something that always happens. When we hear something, when we watch something, there's always a reaction that has a relationship with either our past programming, etc. But after the reaction, then we can choose how much to believe and emphasize and strengthen the reaction or question the reaction. But I'm not sure you can turn off the reaction. You certainly can't do that with reflexes. Like if you tap your knees or whatever, they do that. If you startle someone, they react. That's biological, right? But then what do you do with that reaction? I think that's where the freedom comes in, is after the reaction, what do you do next?
back, I was confounded because although I understood what he meant, I didn't know how I could apply this in my own life. If anyone were given the clear choice of suffering and not suffering, I don't think anyone in their right mind would choose to suffer. So how can I just choose?
I think one of the things to understand that, is the unknown always involves change, and all change leads to the unknown. Because if you do something new that you've never done before, that's not of the family or unfamiliar, you enter the unknown, right? And in the unknown are your worst possible nightmares and your best possible dreams. There are painful things that you haven't even imagined that are in the unknown. And there are magnificent things that you haven't imagined that are in the unknown. And the unknown is 50-50, right? But generally speaking, as we enter blindly and clumsily into the unknown, we default to the negative, right? And so, to change, we are risking going into the unknown territory. And it's true that most of us would prefer to cling to a very imperfect and unsatisfying status quo to a risk of something horrific. Let's jump to the next chapter.
Chapter 2. The Root Cause of All Suffering. One who looks around him is intelligent. One who looks within him is wise. Matshana Loeo.
Some of these things suggest that you want to look inside, like somehow you want to be wise. That's the better one, right? But of course, it's not so simple. If you are in traffic and you hear a horn honking, do you want to be wise or do you want to be intelligent? Well, if you want to increase your odds of living, you want to look around you and take, your best action. If you Want to have a deep insight? Sure, you can look inside, but you may be causing a traffic accident in the process.
We live in a world of thought, not reality. Sydney Banks once said, "Thought is not reality, yet it is through thought that our realities are created." Each of us lives through our own perceptions of the world, which are vastly different from the person right next to us. An example of this is that you could be sitting in a coffee shop, having a quarter-life existential crisis, completely stressed out of your mind about how you have no idea what you're doing with your life when it seems like everyone else has theirs to.
Now, the way that I see it geometrically is that reality is the whole, the one, the sphere. And that's too big to be conscious of. Our conscious mind just can't even track the subatomic particles of a single finger for a single minute, right? It's just way too big. So what words are and what thoughts are models of reality that we create to approximate the parts of reality that we want to focus on. So the models of reality are not reality. They're models. But the question is, how good is the model of reality? You can think of TV screens as being models of reality as well. So you have 360 pixels, the old, phone screens. And then you have 4,000 pixels, right, our screens today. Now, the 4,000 pixel model of the image is a much more complex, much higher resolution model, but the image is not reality, but it's our way of experiencing reality. And the thoughts that we believe are the way that we create our personal model of reality. And we never experience reality directly. We experience our model of reality. And in that sense, we create our model by the thoughts we intake and don't edit, by the thoughts we intake and edit, and the thoughts that we generate. Those are our models. And then the ones that we believe, that's the reality that we experience.
Together, while the person right next to you is happily enjoying their freshly brewed drink while peacefully people watch. How many different answers do you think you'll get? If you survey 100 different people.
So he's effectively proving that everyone has a different model of reality, and that's true.
And ask each of them what event that happened with no meaning, thinking, or interpretation of it. Any meaning or thinking we give an event is on us, and that is how our perception of reality.
So that's true. Any meaning or thinking that we have about an event is our model of the event. And it is true that you can be much happier when you have a very positive model of reality. However, for example, MDMA is a chemical substance that induces a very euphoric state by suppressing fear-based models of reality. They've done Rorschach tests with MDMA, people on MDMA, and people in a normal state will see positive and negative possibilities in the Rorschach images. People in a depressed or paranoid state will see, horrific shapes in the Rorschach test. People on MDMA will look at an angry face and not see anger. They'll look at a sad face and they won't see sadness. You ask that person, what are you feeling? I'm feeling very sad. The person on MDMA will look at their face and say everything's great because it suppresses the fear, pain-based elements in the brain. And so a person with MDMA's model of reality is highly trusting. And as a result, that's one of the reasons that MDMA is a date rape drug. Because if someone says, hey, will you have sex with me without a condom and without going over STD tests on a first date in a car, you might say, that doesn't sound like the kind of thing that a kind, courteous person would ask. So maybe you're not a very kind and courteous person, right? In other words, if you want what's best for me, do you want to give me an STD? If you want what's best for you, like, this is not the profile of someone taking care of, sustainable well-being. And so if you're not on MDMA, you might say, I'm going to pass. But if you're on MDMA, and this is why it's a date rape drug, your model of reality is, this is great. Why not? Right? What could go wrong? Now, when you get infected or wake up the next morning and say, what did I do? And have a headache and all that. Well, then you say, well, that wasn't a very kind thing to do, was it? To put drug in my glass and, impregnate me and all that. It wasn't a very good idea. So that wasn't a very kind thing to do. And then what do you feel? Well, you feel sad, right? You wish the world was a kinder place, right? And so it's true that you suffer when you say, yeah, the world is not a very kind place. But it's also true that, you don't make a kid suffer in an unwanted, unplanned pregnancy in a single family that can't support a kid for a long time, right? And so including pain and suffering in our models of reality can decrease the long-term pain of suffering in our reality. And so while it is true that if you delete all paranoid, suspicious, fear-based, pain-based, depressing thoughts about reality, you can have, a blissful place with whatever's going on. I'm not clear that the world overall would be healthier, or that the species, for example, the human species, would have survived or be alive today following, a use of using models of reality that have nothing fearful about them.
Reality is created. This is how our experience of life is created from the inside out. It's not the events that happen in our lives, but our interpretation of them.
I'd say it's both, right? Because our interpretation is in part like, if someone slaps us in the face, we say, ow, and then they slap us again. We say, ow, and then they slap us again. We could have an interpretation, maybe they're just curious. Maybe they enjoy hearing ow, right? But we could also have a say, maybe this person isn't a very kind person. Maybe this person is high on the sociopathic continuum and enjoys watching other people suffering. And that model of reality, while it's not real, it's a model, helps us step back and say, I'm not going to spend time with this person anymore, right? And so it can be useful. Let's jump ahead again to the next chapter.
Chapter 3. Why do we even think? I think and think and think. I've thought myself out of happiness 1,000,000 times, but never once into it. Jonathan Safran Foer.
I would beware of asymmetries. So what the author and the quoter, the author of the quote and the book author are stating is that thinking is a one-way street. That the more you think, the less happy, right? So you have unhappiness here, and I have happiness here. And that the more you think, the more unhappy you will be. But that's granting the power of happiness to thought, right? So it would follow, right, that that thoughts can also make you happier, right? And of course, we all know that that's the truth, right? So, for example, this book has made people happy. What is it? It's thoughts. There is nothing in this book that isn't a thought, right? Because words generate thoughts. And thoughts are infectious, they're viral, right? And so what we're really looking is the author is purporting to have superior thoughts to the average person. Otherwise, why write a book? Like if I say, I have thoughts, you have thoughts, my thoughts are worse than everyone else's thoughts. Let me tell other people how to think the way I do. That's a bit sociopathic, right? So the basis of writing a book is I have thoughts, you have thoughts. My thoughts may be better than your thoughts at helping you go where you want to go, right? So that's the basis of anyone writing a book. And in this case, the idea is that thoughts are one way, right? I've thought myself out of happiness, but I've never thought myself into happiness. Well, let's look at that. Let's look at thinking ourselves. Let's say I wake up, I feel great. That's something that happens sometimes. I wake up, feel great. And then I think, oh, I wonder if my crew is doing a good job. Damn, I better go check on them, right? So immediately my happiness goes down, all right? Now I check on the crew, how are you guys doing? What's going on? Send me a video. And it's they did a good job, right? So I say, oh, good. The crew did a good job. I don't have anything to worry about. My happiness goes up again, right? So thoughts took me down, or, I was happy. The thought made me unhappy. Then that thought led to an action, which then led to positive feedback, which then made me feel happy. And I feel great, right? And so thoughts are going both ways, but I would say the general premise of the book is that thinking is always negative. If thinking was always negative, don't read his book, right? Because it's just lots of thinking.
We as humans have evolved to develop a sophisticated ability to rationalize, analyze, and think because it simply helped us survive. Our minds do an incredible job to keep us alive, but it does not.
Yeah, no, that's true, right? And it is true that all technology becomes outdated, right? And paranoid thinking is overdone, meaning that it's very true that we overuse the tool. But it's not you don't minimize the fact that we're even here able to read books like this. When if at any point in our lineage over the last billion years, we hadn't survived, we wouldn't be here to be able to read a book that can diminish the fear-based thinking that's kept us alive, right? So it's not a small thing to gloss over that we are alive as a species.
Not help us thrive. It is solely concerned with our safety and survival. But
I would also say that that's incorrect, right? That instinctive amygdala thinking, reactive paranoid thinking, is threat-based. But philosophical thinking, the thinking that is in writing a book like this, is not just about survival. It's about thriving, right? So the author is discounting thought while creating thoughts that are about thriving. So there's a little bit of tension and blurriness there.
But not with our fulfillment or joy. Our mind.
So you'd probably ask the author, did you feel joy writing this book? Yes. Well, what is it? It's a collection of thoughts that you thought. Other people are thinking about your book and enjoying it, right? So there's a little bit of tension in that.
Our mind's job is to alert us of potential dangers in our environment that may threaten our lives.
I don't say that. Our mind's job is to do the tasks we give it, right? We can give it tasks of insights. We can give it jobs to do threats analysis. We can give it jobs to write books on inspiration. We can give it a job to write poetry. It's all constructing energy with words. Let's jump ahead. Thoughts versus thinking.
Chapter 4. Thoughts versus thinking. Stop thinking and end your problems. Lao Tzu. Thoughts are the...
So that's an interesting riddle, right? Stop thinking and end your problems. Now, if you don't understand the English language, you don't think about that, right? But if you understand English, your job as an adult is not just to blindly trust anyone who writes anything. You actually have to think about that, right? And so stop thinking. If you really believe that, you don't say it, because saying it generates a thought. You see the paradox? Anyone who tells you to stop thinking is a hypocrite. Because what are you supposed to do? Blindly trust anyone who says anything or think about it, right? And so that's the tension we have there.
Energetic, mental raw materials from which we use to create everything in the world.
No, we don't create everything with our mental raw materials. We create our models about the environment. The environment is out there, and it's not created by our thought. It's the sensate experience.
You can't experience anything without thought.
What about being burned on a flame? So I get burned. What is that experience? Now, some would say that until you label it, it could be exciting, it's exhilarating, right? And you can transform certain sensate experience into something else. You can say that I'm not nervous, I'm excited, because there's pretty similar chemicals produced. But if you say I'm excited to burn myself, let me burn myself again, is that a good model of reality? As opposed to, ooh, that startled me, I don't want to be burned again, right? That's a more useful version of reality, because then your body is in one piece rather than burned to a cinder, because you don't have a good model of reality.
It's important to know that thoughts are a noun and aren't something that we do, but something that we have.
I think thinking is a dynamic process. You have a few forms of thinking. You have receiving of a thought, the unquestioned receiving of a thought. Then you have the reflecting on the thought, verifying it or rejecting it. I'm doing a lot of questioning and rejecting of thoughts. Then you have, do you just throw the whole thought out, or do you iterate it? And that's a more dynamic process. Then you put forth a thought. Then I'm putting forth a thought. Then you're going to listen to that, and you're either going to be confused, like, I don't know, right? That means you don't know how to think, which is pretty common. But that's a problem as well. There's a huge problem in our culture by not having the skill to think, because we move towards populism and charisma, right? Hitler was incredibly charismatic, and it's a problem. It's a problem if you can't think for yourself.
A thought takes no effort or force on our end.
I disagree. There's a current in the body. There's energy digesting there is an electrical charge that is spent in listening and thinking. That's incorrect. And it takes much more work to iterate a thought than it does simply to absorb it, right? It does take energy to take a thought, critically analyze it, and do something useful with it.
And it is something that just happens.
No, it doesn't. Thoughts typically happen in response to, in this case, a book. Like I'm having thoughts in response. That didn't happen. I bought the book. So he wrote the book. I'm reading the book. And out of all that energy, a thought emerges.
We also cannot control what thoughts pop into our minds.
Let's look at that. So if you watch, 6 hours of porn the day before or the night before, or you watch 6 hours of Blood and Guts, or you watch 6 hours of Eckhart Tolle, right? Will your dreams be different at all, right? Well, he says you're changed by everything. This book had changed you, right? So would that, right? So I would say that, right, the things that we read repeatedly, etc., do influence our thoughts. They create habits, entrained patterns. So I disagree with that. You're not planning every little thought that pops into your head in the moment, but you're creating an environment in which it's likely that some thoughts will pop into your head rather than others. So it's not black or white.
The source of thoughts comes from something that is beyond our minds.
I'm curious what evidence he would present for that. It seems like the source of thought is language, and we're composing it with what? If we don't define mind, like aren't we composing the language with our mind? Isn't everything that I'm saying composed with my mind? Or is he saying that I'm not saying any of this at all, or thinking any of this, that this is some superpower coming through me? So I don't know what he means by that, but I don't just say he's correct. He may or may not be.
Universe, if you will. Thinking.
So he's saying it comes from the universe. Well, are we a part of the universe? Later in the book, he says we're a part of everything. So in that sense, we are the universe, so it's coming from us.
On the other hand, is the act of thinking about our thoughts. This takes a significant amount of energy, effort, and willpower, which is...
I would agree, right? Reactive thinking, meaning if you do not teach a child language, they don't think, right? So, if you raise a child in silence without books, without any thought, they will not think, right? It takes a lot of energy to learn a language. It takes a lot of energy to teach a child to talk, which is also teaching them to think with words and listen and receive other people's thoughts. Once you've put in that huge amount of energy to transfer the culture through language into a mind, well, then the culture has a certain momentum around it, right? So thoughts just pop up effortlessly. But that's after you've spent several years teaching language and thinking. Then it's easy. It's the same with a train, right? If you spend several years with hundreds of thousands of people pushing the train and it gets a momentum, and then you let go, and then you say, well, the train just moves. No, it was set in motion with a lot of energy. But it's true, it takes, once the momentum and inertia of a culture is inside the mind, it takes more energy to divert. Just listening to this Audible book, easy, right? I don't have to spend any energy, he did. But it takes energy to have this analysis. I'm spending way more energy to make this video than I would just to have neutral opinion.
Finite resource. Thinking is actively engaging with the thoughts in your mind. You don't have to engage with each thought in your mind, but when you do, that is thinking. Thinking is the root cause of all of our psychological suffering.
I would agree with that. Thinking is the root cause of all our psychological suffering. And you cannot have things be asymmetrical, right? And thinking is the source of our liberation from the suffering, right? So thoughts are the doorways into psychological suffering and the door out of it, right? What this book is teaching us is to think differently about our thoughts and do a fair amount of work. If people do not put the work in, there'll be very little change.
Now you might be
wondering, and he's promising a profound change, which is, quite a big promise.
Where do positive thoughts fit into the picture? Positive thoughts, or thoughts that feel good, are not a result of thinking.
I disagree. One of the exercises I've found most rewarding recently is to create one positive future a day. Now, my wife doesn't like thinking. So I ask her, do you have any positive future? I don't know. She also doesn't get the energy of that exercise, meaning she doesn't know, she doesn't want to think about it, she doesn't think about it, she doesn't create the positive future. She still believes mostly negative futures, right? Oh, it's not going to work out for me, this, that, right? She has futures, right? But they're negative. Now, it would take work for her to create positive alternative futures. And that's what I wanted to do for myself. The brain, the fear-based brain, to protect us, is constantly coming up with negative futures. That's biological. But that creates a very dim world view of the future, right? Because that could go wrong, that could go wrong, that could go wrong, and it's all true. That could all go wrong. And now I have this could go wrong, that could go wrong. I've got 3 negative futures. My body will create that out of anxiety. And I'll look at it and say, yeah, could be. And I'm not sure I can stop that entirely, right? I don't know what that person's going to do, but they could be cruel here. Now, it does take energy to create positive futures. But I would say that my anticipation and enjoyment of the future is up about 200% over the past couple of months of doing this exercise. So I have now more than 60 positive futures that I've carefully constructed, showing how things could go very well. And what I find is that takes work. It's counterintuitive. It's not instinctive. I have to sit down and do it. And I look at it and I say, yeah, that could happen. And what I've also done as a result of that, like several times as I've created these positive futures, I thought I like that one. And I get up and I buy something that could make that happen, or I email someone to make that happen, or I send something to my assistant and say, do research to make that happen. And so those futures are not only, positive futures that could be, and like 10% of them are 50% more likely because of the things that I've done as a result of imagining them. All of that takes effort. But I would say that I'm twice as optimistic about the future now, having spent that time doing that, than I was before that. My wife is not twice as optimistic about her future, right? Because she didn't want to spend the energy doing that. And so that comes back to this thing that if thinking can take you down if you do it one way, it's like a car. A car can drive you downhill. If you do a U-turn, the car can drive you up the hill. It's just a car.
They are instead generated by our natural state of peace, love, and joy. They are a byproduct.
Our natural state of peace, love, and joy. We are all part of nature, and many humans are not filled with peace, love, and joy, right? So we've got a little bit of a paradox. Later in the book, he'll say that we're all the same in all ways, i.e. we are part of nature. But then he says our natural state is to be different than we are. Well, are we part of nature? Then our natural state is to be how we are, right? Hummingbirds are constantly territorial, fighting away, other hummingbirds. Are they part of nature? Are they feeling peace, love, and joy? Or are they saying, hey, don't get near my hummingbird feeder?
Product of a state of being, not a state of thinking. We will go into depth about this in the next chapter. For now, let's do a quick thought experiment. I'll ask you a question, and all you need to do is be aware of what you're experiencing, and we'll review what happened after. What is the dream amount of money you want to be making per year? Pause here and wait for an answer to surface.
So when I did this exercise, first I thought of 100,000, and I had thoughts of kind of peace, because that's very easy for me to do. And I had thoughts of peace, like no stress around that, right? And I thought, no, probably my dream would be 300,000, which I also do. That would allow me to do a little bit more. I have mixed reactions about wanting to do more, right? There's one thought of, I don't want to earn any money, and what I would do there. So that was my response to that.
Give yourself about 30 to 60 seconds to think about your answer of how much money you want to be making in a year. Don't move on to the next step until you've had a decently sized train of thought about how much you want to make. Now take that amount and multiply that by 5. What do you think about this new dream goal for your income when we move?
So 1.5 million, my response is a little bit of anxiety because it takes me into the unknown. Like I know how to make 100,000 a year. I know how to make 300,000 a year and be in my comfort zone. I don't know how to make 1.5 million and be in my comfort zone. And the thought of attaching to the goal and following it, right? I know many people who attach to making high income goals and get more miserable. And some grow and learn, right? And so I'm aware that it can go both ways as I set a goal. So as he says, 1.5 million, one, I don't need that. Two, I don't, have a clear sense of desire. I'm aware that it would take me into the unknown.
Multiplied it by 5. Take at least another 30 to 60 seconds to become aware of how you're feeling when you think about that, and see what other thinking comes up for you as you feel your emotions. Don't move on until you've done the above. Okay, let's bring it back in and review what happened. After I asked the first question of what is the dream amount of money you want to be making per year, within a few seconds an answer popped into your mind. That is a thought. Notice how quickly and effortlessly that came to you.
So that wasn't just a thought, right? I looked at, I've had times when I focused on making a lot of money and my responsibility and stresses have gone up. And I've had time where I've had the goal of making no money and the stresses went down, but also some boredom went up. So I know there's a mid-range in there for me. And so I thought about that. It wasn't just an effortless thing. That's an informed question, right? So I didn't feel that his projection of what I would be thinking at all matched.
After an answer popped into your mind, I asked you to think about your answer. What happened after I asked you to think about your answer? If you're like most people, you probably went on a wild roller coaster once you began thinking about that thought.
Well, apparently I'm not like most people because I didn't go on a wild roller coaster. It was a very stable question, and I think it's, a reasonable one, except that he's using it to suggest that all thinking is bad based on the idea that I'm supposed to go on a wild roller coaster. But again, it didn't correlate to reality at all. So he has a model of reality that is not anticipating my experience, basically. But I wonder if he is intelligent enough to update his model to include my experience, or if, like most dogmatists do in their models, because no model is perfect, there will always be anomalous data that doesn't fit any model, because reality is bigger than the model. But dogmatists punish, discount, exclude, and hold on to their model, right? And I'm curious what this author would do with the fact that nothing of his models has been jiving for me.
I have been thinking how there's no way you can make that much. No one in your family is making that much money.
No, I didn't think that, right? I made $300,000 last year. I made $100,000 years back, right? Those are, I don't need